This is the Internet Court of Truth and Lies. Its purpose is if you have something that you think is the truth in the media or you think is a lie in the media, then you can ask essentially 8 jurors to judge about your judgment. The way it works is like a court. There's a verdict, there's a standard set of 8 questions that are used for all the trials, which are never the perfect questions, but they all pertain to how humans think about and reason about truths and lies. You answer the 8 questions to dissect the truth or lie that you're proposing. Then the 8 jurors each answer the same set of verdict questions. The real purpose of all this is to get some dialogue started between humans about whether or not something is a truth or a lie. This goes to Descartes. Reality is structured in such a way, and Descartes said this directly, that you rarely can prove that something is truth or a lie beyond any possible dispute, because there'll always be some premises to the logic you're using that you cannot observe are actually true or not true. If a premise isn't there to see, or you never saw it, then your proof is only as good as your agreement with other people. This is how the court system works. Descartes was known as the father of the rules of evidence in law for the world. He wrote all this 50 years prior to Sir Isaac Newton's Principia in 1600. He's also known as the father of the age of reason because he was trying to figure out what truth was. He noticed that the brain is an intuition engine about truth, and he argued that it had to be, because you can never know whether all the premises underlying a decision about truth or falsity hold. It's the way the brain actually computes. One of the things he said was, "I think, therefore I am." And really what he meant by that was, I'm not real. So this was in his discussion of whether a human is actually in reality. In other words, whether the reality that I see is in fact actual reality. His argument was that it is, as long as you can observe your own thinking and you can report it out to somebody and they agree with you. So if you can make the argument to somebody, provide evidence, which are the premises to somebody, even though you can't approve it. Descartes' explanation of this was, believe it or not, going back 2,000 years to Euclid and the geometry. In geometry, you can often prove things are true because the premises can all be explicit and you can show the person all of the premises necessary to a specific conclusion, which is typically things like, what are the sides of a right triangle? That's a very big deal. For years and years in AI and the theories of computation, human brain computation and neural computation for rabbits or whatever, people have argued just in the last 15 or so years that the human brain is a prediction engine, it's an expectation engine. And we'd studied that hypothesis for many years. I actually wrote a paper called Action Perception that used that hypothesis. The problem was always when you tried to implement the system that did that, it didn't work. It didn't behave like a human. Its capability to behave like a human brain was extremely limited, and it was completely unconvincing. There was another theory that was out there. That's called perceptron theory, where the idea of the basic unit of brain computation was you had a bunch of inputs to a unit, and each of the inputs had a weight associated with it. It had some value that would get multiplied times the input. You'd have an input here was multiplied by one value, an input here that was multiplied by another input there that was multiplied by another. Then you summed them all together, and you had an output, which is the sum of the weighted input products, some of the products, and then that was thresholded. If that threshold was met, then those inputs were seen as correlated to the memory that was associated, with the inputs. We know that if you take some of these inputs and call them the subject, and some of the inputs and call them the predicate or context around which the subject is being understood, then the output would be a proposition, a true or false proposition, but it's not true or false. It exists or it doesn't exist. It's in reality or it isn't, or it's in my imagined reality, because I'm in a context where imagination is allowed, and that would work. In my studies over the years, I became convinced that the perceptron theory was the correct theory and that these expectation theories were incorrect, largely because every time we tried them, they failed. They just miserably failed. You wouldn't believe how badly they failed, but they did. There were experiments done where people hand wrote 1 million expectations. There was a guy in Texas that did this and tried an expectation engine. He was famous because everybody thought that he had solved the problem and so forth and so on, until they actually interacted with his system, and the system was garbage. It was not acting like a human and responding to questions and so forth. In fact, it couldn't even speak. It's a long story, but it couldn't even speak good English. I became convinced that if you think of these perceptron units and you think about what really goes on in the brain, which is about 100 billion neurons between your ears, and the average number of inputs to a neuron is on the order of about 3,000 inputs. So you've got 100 billion times 3,000 potential perceptrons, which are little recognition engines based on memory. We don't really know what the number is. Part of the reason we don't know what the number is, we know that the chemistry of the brain and a variety of other factors having to do with chemistry in the brain, for example, whether or not the fibers are myelinated or not, so forth, have an effect on how fast the memories can be recruited. So remember that the little weightings are memories. So if, let's say that you've got a perceptron that has, pick a number, 50 inputs, 25 of them, let's say, are subject and 25 are predicates. So some of those memories might take a second to remember. Some of them might take minutes. Some of them might take days. Some of them might take years. It's the way the human system works. If you look at that, then you start realizing that what's going on is these computations that the brain are doing are just massively parallel. Not that you can't find some parts of the brain that are just basically being silent. You can. But if you look at the number of brain cells that are in the brain that are lighting up on even a simple sentence, like even a simple sentence, you'll get about 90 million neurons lighting up. And that's within a 10-second interval. which is crazy. So that's a partial recruitment of some of the memories that could be elicited on a simple sentence. These numbers are incredible numbers. That's 90 million propositions being lit up. So these are all proposition inputs to the output. A subject is a set of propositions, a predicate is a set of propositions that are input as one's functioning as some of them are functioning as the subject, some of them are functioning as the predicate outcome. And you can see this in natural language all the time. This is how natural language, the reason you can graph the hierarchies in natural language and so forth and so on. We've come to the belief that the brain is not an expectation engine. It's a knowledge engine. What's going on when you watch people's behavior and so forth is you see very large numbers of these propositions being formulated and being structured in a form that the human can respond in some coherent way against something impacting on him from reality, whether it's catching a ball or reading a book. That's what we see and what we believe now. I wrote this article basically because you can see this a lot of different ways. You can see that humans are these massively parallel processing. Neurons are not wasted. They are in some sense wasted, but they're really not wasted. The brain is really computing that much. It's not some central processor with some memory units beside. The processing, the memory is all local inside of one of these units. And to get the totality of all the memory that's in between your ears, you would have to pull all the weights from all 3 trillion units that are sitting in your brain. And that's just an estimate of the number of units there are. Of course, you can't do that. You can't do that not only because it would take too long, but you can't do that because these values are recruited. Exactly how they're recruited, we don't know. One of the top guys in neurophysiology, this book was called The Machine Learning Revolution. He edited the 2 top journals in how neurons work physiologically. I asked him once, what is the most profound thing that we don't have a clue how it works in the brain? And his response was, and this was with me, with witnesses sitting there, his response was immediate. He said, memory. It's that recruitment function that we don't understand. We can pretend that we know why it takes long, different amounts of time, but AI machines don't have that problem. Their memories are there. So we can actually dump all the weightings in a Claude or Gemini or whatever. We can write them out as fast as the computer will write. They're used as fast as the computer wants to use them. The difference between these LLM systems and generative AI systems that all use perceptrons is this recruitment, this time delay function that humans have that these machines do not have. If asked, do we understand how recruitment works? The answer is, we really don't have a clue. Somebody will discover it eventually, because a lot of people know this is a problem, but we still don't really have a clue about it. We can write books about it if we wanted to, and they will sound good, but we still don't have a clue, just to be clear. That's what this article is about, is that we're knowledge engines, we're not expectation engines. That's why. So I'll go over my verdicts. And I give 2 examples. One is O-ring inspection, where you can see the parallelism. Another one is the deceit and lies. We know that's a primitive computation. It's not a derivative of computation. It's fundamental to these things. It doesn't go away. Once reality is perceived the way Descartes said, you're stuck. You can't not engage in deception. Now you can, on a given occasion, you can not engage in deception. But your brain will always be able to detect deception is going on. And sometimes you'll be surprised that all of a sudden it dawns on you that you've just been deceived. But it is always there, and it's always there for all animals. So all animals under this system, this belief that we have as to how brains compute, all animals can engage in deception. All animals can engage in recognizing the truth, or they'd be dead. And they can engage in recognizing deception, or they'd be dead. And they engage in perception, or they'd be dead. Okay. They wouldn't have survived Darwinian revolution because these neural nets fundamentally behave this way. This is not a hypothesis. This is what we believe is absolutely the case, as strongly as Darwin believed in natural selection. And it's just that way. So is it the truth? I said, yes, I'm completely sure of the thesis of this paper. I know of very few people who've studied these problems as long as I have who disagree with me at all on this. I know a couple of three, maybe. I definitely know a whole ton of people who are not educated who disagree with me. Is it the whole truth? I said, no, there's a lot about this that would basically show the same thing. There are a lot of ways to show it. The example with O-rings and deception are just two. At the beginning of the article, I actually give you another one where I said, I'll take this hands-off poster as a good demonstration of an empirical observation of your brain's capacity for parallel knowledge computation. One predicate, hands-off, and many subjects like clean energy, libraries, clean air, which are understood differently without expectation processing. They're completely unordered. This is not a political statement, but an empirical observation that you can replicate for yourself. In other words, you can go to take that predicate and put it on any of these things, and you can say, yeah, I can understand that, even if I might disagree with it. Or I might believe that my understanding is different than your understanding. But you're understanding it. That's the critical thing. You get argumentative and say, I don't understand it because you're deceptive. So it's not the whole truth. Is it nothing but the truth? I pretty much said this is nothing but the truth. And the reason is that there's nothing that I'm saying which is hiding some facts that we know that would say that what I'm saying is not true. And so I said, yes. What's the deceit? There's no deceit, scientists. Most of us don't like deceit or lying of any form. Is the deceit or truth intended? Yeah, the truth is intended. Again, same thing. What's the motivation? Is to be informative. I think that, and a lot of my friends think, that it's really terribly important that people understand how massively parallel the computation is going on in your brain, how much of what's going on is completely unconscious, and how really super brilliant even the dumbest person is. Just to be clear, what's the social acceptability of the truth or lie? I'd say perfectly acceptable. And for those people who are wrong, they're wrong. There was a time when I believed in expectation theory. That was 45 years ago. But after a while, it just went. That after a while was after thousands of hours of programming expectation systems, when you finally realized this was a dead end. what label would improve the social acceptability of the truth or lie. And I said, no label needed. So I'd like to go through the jurors and get a 20 to 30-second summary of their verdicts. Juror 1.
Hello. What I found interesting in this, and I want to ask you if this is true, on a serial computer, it has to check a rule before reaching a conclusion. And the brain allows for it to have instantaneous pattern recognition. For instance, like I play a tum drum, and when I hear a familiar note on my drum, I don't calculate the frequencies. My neural network doesn't, it just vibrates in resonance with it. You simply know the sound. Like when I tune my guitar, I simply know the sound. I don't have to go through anything in my brain.
So when we count the number of perceptrons, we're counting the number of neurons that are in your ear listening to the sound. So all of these are perceptrons, all of these are propositions.
So we are calculating.
So it's at all levels, and so when we count them and we say there's 90 million, for example, we're counting all those neurons. So for example, there's 100 million neurons in each of your retinas. So whenever you're looking at something and recognizing something that you're looking at, we've just counted 200 million neurons.
So this is wrong.
And
you don't
each of them is contributing, we don't know how many propositions. The biggest thing to realize, no, we're doing it at all levels. Neurons only do one thing for a living. That's these perceptrons. That's what's argued. There's no other thing they do. So when you're thinking they don't, this is not like a serial computer. It's not like a serial computer because it's not a computer at all. These are not Turing machines. These are not things that can do if-then conditionals. They do one each, kinda.
But we call that instantaneous then?
Another way to put it is they're not what are called stack engines.
Yes.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Until you tried to put a neuron under a microscope and actually experienced it. But that's when you realize how small these things are and how plausible it is that there's 100 billion of them between your ears. Then you begin to understand what we're really talking about, because it's really crazy. And most people think the brain is this sort of mushy thing that sort of works. They don't understand that these computation units are incredibly small, and there's an incredibly large number of them. And none of them operate like a computer, the little computer that you learned, you programmed and so forth and so on. None of them operate like that. It's just not what they do. So they operate like a circuit that you can build, which would be a perceptron, but they don't operate like a computer.
So I'm pulling that out of my memory, like when I recognize a tone. That's just something because somebody that doesn't recognize it wouldn't have.
At all levels, you're recognizing things that ultimately result in recognizing that it's a tunnel. In recognizing it's a tunnel, you're recognizing other things about the tunnel.
Okay.
Like it's a long tunnel. Why am I going 70 miles per hour and stuff like that? Juror 2.
That's me. As usual, when it comes to brain topics, my brain just don't want to brain write correctly. When you made the comment a while ago about your brain, people think the brain is just this soft, mushy thing. Mine is nothing but mush at times, and then sometimes it's smart, like today. But I had to agree with you on it, or I wasn't sure about it. But yeah, now that we went through the trial, I agree with you because my brain.
Yeah, you would be amazed. You would be stunned how smart you are. You have no idea just how perfectly wonderful your brain is.
Okay? Oh, mine is not.
No, you're talking. Okay. I can tell you have no idea. Because I know what the computation is,
that don't
what
have
kind of computation
a working brain anymore, so I am pretty lucky.
If you can walk, if you can look, if you can hear music, okay, your brain is doing inspiring things.
My brain's gonna get me in trouble one of these days.
Probably always does.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, Juror 3.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, according to your verdict 8, of course, I am already pre-typed as being wrong, but nevertheless, I have 2 problems with your view. Okay, one is neurons belong, the problem that nobody's solved yet is that neurons belong to more than one network. How does this work? How are they partitioned between different networks when they come?
We
And
observe
the
that.
other
We
thing
can
is that-
observe that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But how does the brain what decisions the brain is making to you know, put nets
It's
or to light
evolution.
up neurons
Yeah,
in one
it,
network rather than another? And they
it's
overlap and they have to
yeah,
repeat.
it's speed and evolution, and you can
Yeah.
pretty much figure it all out that way.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's the computation speed and effort that's needed for what the brain needs to be able to do to keep the organism alive. Okay, thereby evolution. One of the guys who disagrees with me is Jeff Hawkins, who wrote a book called A Thousand Brains, and he meant 1,000 brains inside your brain. That's what you just said. These sub-brains that are inside of your brains are specialized to different purposes. They're all computing the same thing, so they all arrive at different propositions. But the propositional structures can be recognized because the output of one of these propositions can become the subject or predicate in another proposition on a completely different subject.
That's right. There's a global system at work here.
No, there is not.
With the networks.
There's no global system. The point is that there's not one, there's 100 billion or a billion of them, global systems at work.
All right. Yeah, that's right. What I mean is that the bigger than the particular neural decision networks, we have to go up another level.
Yeah, it's like your retinas. Those are very specialized neurons, but they're computing the same thing. They're computing what neurons compute. That's our belief. The perceptrons work because you see them working in LLMs and generative AI and all these other things. They work not because we have the exact nature of it's technically called autocorrelation, that we have the exact nature of the autocorrelation that's being done in these units. But perceptron is good enough.
Yeah.
It will model it not because it's modeling it perfectly, but because what you really needed was anything that would do that autocorrelation, and you just needed 1 trillion of them.
Yeah. In the LLM networks, the global and inverted commas, the part of it is a back propagation where it's making each perceptron is operating in a different, it's contributing differently each time. It's effectively
the memory
to a
can
different
change.
network.
The backprop is affecting the change in the memory with experience. And we invented backprop in the 87, 86 timeframe at CMU, precisely based on these perceptron theories, by the way.
The second point is that, and given that the one that is the brain is, most of the brain's thinking are going to be about lies. It's going to be thinking about wrong stuff because there's only one is going to be right, let us say. So it gives the idea that there's a short-term advantage in sticking with your lies rather than that you need slightly longer view. We're talking seconds here, but nevertheless, a longer view to adjust and to extract the truth out of this parallel processing. Whereas if you think in the short term, you're better off with lies than with the truth. Yeah. I suggest.
Yeah, we know that there's some sharp divisions on this memory. So this thing that's called short-term memory, and there's ultra short-term and long-term memory. We know that there are some pretty big divisions on how it works, how memory is recruited. We know something about how it's recruited, but to say we understand how it's recruited is a lie. We really don't. And I think that somebody someday is going to be the brilliant person who accidentally stumbles across the right magic, and he's going to figure it out, and it's going to be a beautiful thing that we see that we never saw before.
Yeah. The other point about just the YouTube video that you showed, you mentioned about this idea about responsibility. The AI needs to be responsible. I think that's not going to happen. The capital owners of AI are going to demand that we show responsibility towards the AI, not that AI has responsibility towards us at all. I just want to throw that in.
Yeah. So my argument is that the people or the companies, whichever one you want to sue, or put the law against, they should be held responsible for what they do. Okay.
But it won't be like that.
So I think it's possible.
Well,
but
imagine
I don't,
the laws
yes.
will have to be implemented so that we don't destroy any of these robots or any of the ruin any of the data centers that have been employed to run this stuff. They will all have to be protected from us, from the public.
Yeah, but I think that we have laws around imperfect systems where people are held responsible. And so parents are responsible for their children. Yeah. It's true. Okay. In every country in the world, there are laws that guarantee you that parents are responsible for their children. The people are held responsible for things all the time. People in companies are held responsible for things all the time. It works. There are laws that govern that. The idea that you can't be responsible, yes, you can. People can be held responsible.
Landlord has greater rights than the person who rents from him. Yeah, the renter, the user is always lower down the scale in terms of how he's been put in terms of responsibility of the people of the layers above. There's no equality that would in a responsibility towards the AI.
You're thinking in terms of the AI as the producer of the AI. I'm thinking in terms of when regular people or other people or companies are using the big producer's AI and how they're using the tool, responsible for how they have used the tool. And my argument is that they can be made responsible for that. If I use the tool to kill 100 million people, then I can be held responsible for that. Right now, they're not responsible for that.
No, this is a long subject. Yeah.
But it's an interesting subject, and I think this is the one that we need to be on. Trying to get these AI systems to do something that's non-human is like really ridiculous because they're inherently deception engines. That's fundamental to how they operate.
Yeah.
Four? Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, I was a little bit confused by the phrasing here of expectation as opposed to calculation.
Yeah.
If you hand me what appears.
So I wasn't calling it calculation, I was calling it knowledge. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, let's say knowledge. If I don't know what ice cream is, and you hand me a vanilla ice cream cone, I'm not going to know what to do with it without you handing me some knowledge. If I do have some knowledge of ice cream and you hand me a vanilla ice cream cone, I'm going to have an expectation of what it tastes like. I don't understand how you're differentiating between.
I would argue that I've had kids and grandkids. I would argue that the way I hand you your first ice cream cone is I lick it, or the kid is just hungry enough that he's going to slosh it in his face. But I will show him me using it, and then he will pick up on it immediately and try using it the same way. Okay.
So you're offering knowledge in addition to the experience itself.
Yeah.
So it's not.
So he's got knowledge already built in. One of the things that turns out, Brian, to be really interesting here is the inherited knowledge. What's the innate knowledge and how is it carried over? We know that a lot of things that you know are actually inherited from your ancestors.
We believe that. We've covered this briefly. I've never seen anything resembling objective information on this topic.
I just discovered a paper, which I'll try to find for you, where they reiterated what I just said, but they showed some knowledge that was being inherited, not in the DNA, but in other parts of the cells. And they were showing that knowledge, that express knowledge, was being inherited by other components of the cell.
Did you come across that?
That's an article that I read in the last week, and I should find it. But there is a literature on this.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
It's just not a big literature.
I understand.
5.
I think I'm Juror 5. I don't know how the brain computes. I don't know that, I'm not sure that anyone knows how the brain computes. I understand from this that there are several theories, conflicting theories. What occurs to me is, why could it not be the case that the brain evolved with more than one way of computing depending on circumstance?
So that was a big question. That
Okay.
was the biggest question we had. We came to the conclusion it computes exactly one way. All neural systems are computing essentially the same functions always. And we can emulate those functions with a perceptron. And it'll be good enough to get a human out, a humanoid out, and it will be convincing as a human. Okay. At all levels of the computation, it can be done that way. That stuff we've proven. There are ways in which we prove these things, but we've proven them. We can take a perceptron and get it to compute anything that we think that the perceptrons couldn't compute. We all of a sudden figured out how they could, and oh my God, we did. And so one of the earliest problems we had was, how did people do mathematics, and how do people know how to program computers? How do they learn these things? And then back in the late 80s, we figured out how to get perceptrons to compute these things. We've now proven that, because you'll see things like these LLMs doing mathematics. They're only as good as humans are at it, so they get messed up. But they can compute mathematics, or they can program computers. That was emergent. That was not because they were set up and programmed to do that. They were set up and programmed to learn whatever they were learning, and they just happened to also learn these other things that people do. That's actually happened. It's crazy. Now, to refine the knowledge of math, you have to treat them like humans. You have to not only train them on those larger data sets, but you have to train them on more mathematics, so that they're not lying to themselves about the math. They're not getting the models wrong about what the underlying models, so the math models are. And so it's not like you can pick up a Claude that's only been trained on, English text, and ask it to do math, ask it to perform math. It has to also be trained on math. But it is the same system that's doing
that. Can I also ask this? I didn't understand how this example of being able to find the odd O-ring was proof that expectation doesn't come into it. Could it not be the case that these workers were expecting O-rings to look a certain way, and that's why they were so quick to spot the difference? It is something we're all good at doing.
They weren't expecting it. So what it is, they have knowledge about what a O-ring should be.
Okay.
And somehow they're able to do this very fast. So you have to watch the ladies doing this and how good they are at it, which is without training. The thing that amazed me was when I found out there was like 3 of these factories, and the factories were not connected to each other. They were just different suppliers to the military. The guys said, yeah, we just hire these people and tell them to pick out the bad O-rings. And oh my God, some people just do it. And
I thought that's what you were saying, that they were teaching themselves.
They were just figuring out, an O-ring is this perfect little torus, and their brain knows what a perfect little torus should look like somehow. We now know how. We now know how because, by the way, one of the things that Jeff Hinton did, who's at the University of Toronto, was he trained these neural net systems, these perceptron systems, to recognize faces. And he could actually ask the neural net, because this was a neural net he built, he could ask the neural net to show a picture of a cup. And it would show a picture of a cup it had never seen before, but it was its idealized cup. he could ask it to show a picture of everything that the thing would recognize as a torus, and it would show a picture of that torus. It would be the idealized torus, which is crazy. When we first started seeing him doing this, we realized that, yeah, these computations are actually creating the idealized knowledge about what these things are. And then once you're doing an inspection task, now the thing that you would have to explain to some of the women some of the time, if you cared to, but it was really not needed because it's a manufacturing process. They would throw some O-rings away that probably would have worked, but they were just thrown away because they didn't know the mil spec and they didn't know they would have probably worked. But the O-rings were so cheap, they're made by the thousands per hour. It didn't matter. What really mattered was that that a human was looking at these things and seeing things that the mil spec didn't say had to be there. So the O-ring failure rate would be too high. And in fact, I've got an example of this. I don't know if you see this. So this is a circuit that was built in 2000, 25 years ago. In the center of that circuit are chips. And around the circuit, what's looking like gold is pure 24 karat gold. And so these are chips that were built for military radars. And they all had to be hand looked at by people who would just look at them and through, in this case, some kind of a microscope, and judge whether or not there were any defects in them, where a defect was not defined, but people could do it, and they could do it very fast. So here's another one. This is a different substrate. So this is and on that substrate is not silver. That is 24 karat gold. These are circuits using the best possible conductors to conduct electricity. And they're very small, they're very light, but they're not made in large numbers. But they're used but they have to be hand inspected because there are things that a human would catch that the specs won't catch. The human doesn't have to know what they do.
Doesn't have to be trained at all in what to look for. It just occurs to the human.
You just ask them to throw away the ones that look bad. Now, what's required in what I'm saying is they see thousands of these.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is they're making an exception recognizer. Oh, this one doesn't look like what I should be seeing very quickly. So this is a real strong case for parallel processing.
Okay.
Okay, Juror 6.
That's me. Hello, everyone. The brain is such an interesting topic to unpack, as not only as that we only know that on average we use 10% of our brains, but that everything we can achieve is based on our brain capacity, which I like to call self-concepts, which is the bundle of beliefs and values that we have upon us.
You're saying exactly, you're actually using the same words as Descartes used 450 years ago, 400 years ago. What you're thinking is exactly the way he was thinking. It's crazy.
Oh, that's great.
So you're brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to answer what Juror number 2 said about her not existing her full potential, which it triggered like a quote that was once stated that the tragedy of a human brain is that we go to the grave with our music still, with their music still in them. So we never fully know how far we can take our brains. We never fully know how far we can take our brains, which goes to that theory you said on the theory of expectation, is that you came to a conclusion of a dead end, which I find it interesting because the law of expectation says that we don't only get what we want, but what we expect. And whatever we do, we do it with some sort of expectations at the end. And that's how far we can push ourselves.
Yeah, the problem is asserting those expectations. And when we actually tried to code that theory, the one that you just described, we found it didn't work. It was impossible. We couldn't do it. So when we try to actually implement that, it wouldn't work. Even though you can make an analogy to how the knowledge engine that the brain is as an expectation engine, but that's just an analogy. That's not how it works. Actually it's a poor analogy. It's not obvious how a lot of us believed in that. We really strongly believed in that for years. And then it took us actually trying to do it and then understanding how this much simpler system could work that we abandoned the explanation as a useful exploitation of how the brain actually computes generally.
Okay, I would like to take it back because expectations come from our beliefs and core values, which are governed by our self-concept, which goes to the brain. And we can only achieve as much as we can as far as our brains can take us to, which is the self-concepts. Like right now, the self-concepts are the limiting beliefs, how much of a love you can be, how well you can read, and how well you can cook per se. So that if you can measure it on a scale of 10, you can say I'm a great cooker. I will scale myself at 6 out of 10. So that's some sort of limiting belief for you. And I think we can program our brains to push towards the limits of that and actually.
Yeah, my argument in this theory that comes from this theory says that your brain is fundamentally a deception engine. It's a knowledge engine. And it can recognize deception as well as it can recognize truth. And when you're deceiving yourself, what you just said was that you may be deceiving yourself thinking that you can't cook. And then you decide to try cooking. And all of a sudden, a month later, you realize you can cook. Not unexpected. That's how the brain works. So the brain will accept truth. If somebody says to them, like a parent says to a kid, you can't cook, you don't know how to cook, and you probably never know how to cook, the kid will believe that for a while at least. And so that's how human brains work.
The human brain has two parts, which is the thinker and the prover. And that is why it's very hard to argue someone out of the deep belief that they have, because they have years of proving what they thought, and it becomes their actual reality.
What Descartes pointed out, this is basically Descartes' argument, what you just said, these two sides. Descartes said that even when you think you're proving, you are proving within a context. But outside of that context, you're not proving. He argues this because reality is just not organized that way. Again, you can never see all the premises that you would need to see to firmly prove it, except within a context. And his argument was that Euclid was super brilliant because he could define a context where you could absolutely prove things. I don't know if you've ever read Euclid, but if you've ever read Euclid, he has this series of proofs, and every proof is different. It's actually dramatically different, which is crazy. So today we have a single kind of a way to do proofs. Back then he was figuring out how to prove things in geometry. Every one of his proofs is a different proof. I've only followed 2 or 3 of them. They take a lot of work to follow, but you follow the 2 or 3 of them, and Descartes was right. Every one of these proofs is different. It's crazy. So there were different ways you could do the proofs, and you could be absolutely confident that it's true.
isn't that based on based on your memory, which is your subconscious, based on everything you have consumed, and now it has led to that? Because when I don't know his name, but the person who created the bulb, he failed a lot of times. And when he was asked why is he continuing, like after he failed so many times, he gave a good answer that he hasn't failed many times, but he has found that amount of times to do something. So now when you prove something once, you will have that knowledge of I've proven it like this, and then you apply that to a different output, and which is you will get a different output based on
Yeah,
the knowledge you have.
Yeah, we think that what's going on is there's knowledge in your brain that's inherited knowledge, but part of that knowledge is how to recognize causation. Logical proof comes out of having learned that if I pick up this pad and drop it, it will make a sound. That's where your logic comes from. It's a learning process that where you know whether something is true or not in reality based on things that you personally altered and you personally seen the result too. And that's where you get that. You get that logic from that learning. Okay? And that's where that happens. Logic is not built into the brain. It learns it. But by what is built in. Using what is built in. And it does it automatically. It does it to survive, to grow, to eat. Okay. And that's where it all comes from. Yeah. Okay. 7.
That's me, Bob.
3.
Yeah, at the beginning of the trial, you mentioned something that many people who don't know enough to disagree with you. So I definitely fall into that category. However, I mean, I was thinking along the lines of Brian, and then Alexandra said something profound. Yeah, I was also trying to understand that you said the brain's not an expectation engine. But I don't know if you said it is a prediction engine, but I'm
It isn't
struggling
really
to
a prediction engine. It is not a prediction engine or an expectation engine. You cannot code a simulation of the human brain as an expectation engine or a prediction engine. It will not work. We couldn't get that to work. It just wouldn't work. And then coding it as a knowledge engine directly with no expectations.
Yeah.
That works, and it works really well. You get things that look, sound, feel like humans.
Yeah. Look, I think Alexander said something profound for me. I'm starting to lean that maybe certain neurons are prediction engines, certain intuition engines or knowledge engines, because we definitely don't know how it works. But okay, let's use.
So I can
I'm born
take
with certain knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm born with certain knowledge.
Yeah.
I don't learn that. I'm born with it. Eat to eat. Oh, okay. Let's maybe use a different.
It's a good example. That's actually a good example.
Yeah, I need to eat. No one's taught me to eat. I know I need to eat to survive or drink water. That's not. That's ingrained intuition or knowledge.
Yes.
But I walk into my kitchen and I expect the kettle to be in its place, or am I predicting the kettle to be in its place? And if it's not in place,
that's knowledge that you've acquired.
Yeah.
That's the difference. We don't know how to write the system that does that expectation that works, but we do know how to write the system that just treats it as knowledge that has already been learned that works. Or because you put the kettle on the stove, you don't expect it explicitly. There's no computation of expectation. There's just the computation that, oh yeah, that's the kettle that's on the stove and I put it there.
And if the kettle is not by the stove and
you might have you have the knowledge that it was there and there's the stove without the kettle on it.
Okay.
And you don't, but if the problem isn't what you might think I'm saying. The problem is we can't code the brain as an expectation or a prediction engine. But we can code it as a knowledge engine, which is what we've done. And we can prove that as a knowledge engine, you can reason in terms of expectations. In other words, you could know what an expectation is and talk about it.
Yeah,
But
you can
cannot.
only have an expectation if you have knowledge, or you can only have a prediction.
Absolutely. The knowledge comes first. That's the primitive thing. And then expectations can arise. In other words, you can reason about expectations. But the basic thing your brain is doing all the time is not expectation processing. It's not prediction processing. It really isn't.
Yeah, it can't, because the neurons can't code for probability. It doesn't exist. But what it's doing is it's relatively weighting something that's already happened. It's the past. That's what our expectation is.
That's right. So the expectation is the ability to have knowledge about what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And part of that knowledge is expectation knowledge. Sure, you can call it an expectation knowledge because it will reason out that way. But part of the knowledge is not expectation knowledge. Part of the knowledge is inherited stuff that's just going to know it. Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll know that's a real object out there, for example, because you're seeing it.
But also one thing that's just worth saying is that you're looking at the neuronal network in the perceptron way, in a total computational way. But of course, the neuron is a biological object. It's a cell. It has different gene expressions. It has different collections of proteins within it. All sorts of things are going on in neurons, not just the signal that goes on the outside of the sheath.
And different groups of neurons have different mechanisms. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. As I was saying before, they belong to different networks often. There is space, I think, for everyone to think expectation or the expectation in the brain. I can understand it why people think that way, because there is scope, biological scope for more.
Yeah, we believe. We literally believe. This is in easily the 70s. We literally believed that all computation of the brain was expectations and predictions, and we tried to make that work. And we failed and failed and failed and failed and failed and failed. Millions of man hours went into that. Millions of man hours. People made fortunes believing that, but it was all wrong. It never worked, ever. And then they did what we thought should work after we really thought about it. We thought that perceptrons would work, but we couldn't build the hardware. And chip makers wouldn't make the hardware for us, even though it showed them how easy it was and all this stuff. And they said, well, there's no market. But then finally IBM funded it, and all of a sudden they funded the hardware. And all of a sudden they were seeing that the perceptron theory was right. Juror.
Thank you. I'm just fascinated about how the brain works and its ability to like multitask or do things, such as being able to process, retain, and keep information. I think it doesn't matter how the information is presented to you. It can be oral, verbal. I mean, it can be oral, written, or in a form of image. Like your information will be like able to like process it, to be able to interpret it and then process it to your level of understanding. And also, I think, I don't know if it was Juror 6 who mentioned something about belief. I just wanted to ask how is it possible that if I believe that I can't achieve something and then I try to do it, I won't be able to achieve it? Does my belief really affects how my brain works, or my ability?
It doesn't affect how your brain works, but it affects whether or not you can do the thing. Because you can decide you can't do something, and then what you wind up doing often is not doing things that if you were more truthful to yourself, you would know that you had to do that thing. So, for example, a classic mistake that's made in cooking is people have been told by their parents they can't taste the food before it's cooked. Most all good cooks know to taste the food before you serve it, because you're tasting to find out if it's coming along the way you think it should. Good cooks invariably taste what they're cooking. But if you've decided that you're a bad cook, it may be that you just block yourself from ever tasting because you don't believe you're supposed to taste because your mother told you to never taste food.
Okay.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it's the way the brain works, and it has enormous evolutionary value because it's the ability to always understanding whatever you're seeing and doing with respect to the knowledge that's distributed out throughout all of your brain that's involved. So that 10% business of 10% of the brain, that's probably about right, but it's 10% that microsecond. And if you add up the 10 seconds, you might get a number like 15 or 18%. And if you add 24 hours, you might get a number like 80% of your brain was used in the last 24 hours. Just to be clear. The 10% is not some permanent 10% that's just part of your brain that is you. That's not right.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that's basically it. I have one thing that I wanted to let everybody know. For all of the moderators, and there's a bunch of moderators here, and we'll send out the email. It turns out you've always been able to record the trials using the Zoom link, but you didn't have the credential that allowed you to log into Zoom and record the trial. Everybody's credentials are different. Every moderator has a different credential. And evidently, we've had those credentials for a while. He's going to ship all the moderators the credentials so they can record the trials. And so that's the news.
That would be a great thing.
He's sending it out right now. He's human. Okay. He had forgotten that he had actually already done it. He had decided that it was too dangerous. What I told him was that we'll just simply tell the moderators that by dangerous, it means we don't want you, we're being charged for that Zoom usage. It costs our company money. And so the deal is you can record all the trials using that Zoom link, but don't misuse that and just record anything, any Zoom meeting you're in that you're running on your own. Have nothing to do with Truth Court on that Zoom link. And then that would be, if we see that being misused, because we do know how much any user of our Zoom account is using this recording. We do know how much recording time is being used. We don't know what you recorded, but we know how much you're using. And if we see gross abuse of that, we'll literally, that's grounds for you losing the job as a moderator. We want you to record their trials. And
so when you say misuse, does that mean you mean the amount of bytes?
yeah, so if you're doing one trial a week, right? And you used 80 hours.
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't thinking that.
Yeah, that's what we're thinking. Or use 8 hours.
Okay, no.
Yeah. No, we see. Yeah. And so we're just simply saying if we trigger on something like that's a serious matter. Because we see it in our bill every month. And that affects their ability to set pricing for anything. So that's that. So that's the news. Next week we'll hopefully go more into the 25th Amendment stuff. And right now we've set the date back. I sent it out mail to all jurors who could be plaintiffs, and it was all jurors. So if you could be a plaintiff, everybody who could be a plaintiff in a trial was told that you have to get the trial accepted for a time before that date in May that I gave, which is, I actually forgot the date, but it's several weeks into May. And we can always extend that date out if we have to for the sponsor. The sponsor that we've got understands all this. And so if it takes him a longer time to get the trials done, he's fine with that because he understands that we're exercising the system and figuring out how to make it work in detail and so forth and so on. Okay, so we'll see y'all next week.
Bye, y'all.
Okay. Well,
Bye,
bye everyone. See you.
Everyone.